INEFFA is the first Nodcry character, and the first one that can use the new reaction, Lunar Charged. In today's video, we're going over how INEFFA and Lunar Charged works, discussing her best builds and teams, and seeing what she can do in-game. Let's start with Lunar Charged, as that's a big part of INEFFA's kit, and can only happen while she's there. Lunar Charged is essentially a different Electro Charged. When Hydro meets Cryo, or vice versa, Lunar Charged is triggered. As you continually trigger Lunar Charged, a storm cloud will form over the battlefield that strikes Hydro and Electro imbued enemies every 2 seconds. This storm cloud damage is also considered Lunar Charged. Where it gets a little more complicated is how this damage is calculated. Like many reactions, elemental mastery and character level is very important for damage, but the fact Lunar Charge can crit as well as combine stats from every character involved in the reaction makes things a little more messy. Here's the damage formula from the wiki on individual LC damage. So let's break it down and fill it in with one of our own characters. Let's just use Yelan. Our Yelan is level 90, and level 90 characters have a level multiplier of 1446, so 1.8x that is 2604. Since we'll have INEFFA with us, we can add 14% to the LC base damage bonus via her talent, assuming she has a minimum of 2000 attack. That brings our total to 2968. This is the actual base damage of Lunar Charged. From there, we add the EM bonus. In Yelan's case, we have 238 EM. There's a separate formula for this, which you can see here. 6 times 238 divided by 2238 and times 100 gives us the percentage increase of 63.8%. Any reaction bonus from artifact sets, talents, or constellations would be added here as well, but for this example, we are not using any. To make things easier in the future, we'll just go into the details page and see that our current EM gives us about the same, 0.1 less percent than we calculated, but yeah, rounding stuff probably, and 63.7% of the damage is 1909, which brings our total to 4860. Next is the crit multiplier. Our Yelan has 163 crit damage, so assuming it would win the coin toss on her 50% crit rate, it would increase the final damage to 12,804 minus Electro Res of who we're hitting. Let's say 10% as that's most common, so a final damage of 11,524. Okay, that's just Yelan's personal Lunar Charge damage. Now we'll calculate INEFFA's personal Lunar Charge damage. Blah blah blah, 332 EM, 216 crit damage. Because INEFFA has more EM and crit damage, her final number is quite a bit higher at 15,672 versus Yelan's 11,524. The only way for Yelan to do more LC damage is if she crits while INEFFA doesn't, something that's not likely to happen often. This is important to point out because how Lunar Charge combines stats to increase damage depends on who deals the most personal Lunar Charge damage, which is what we are just calculating. In this team, INEFFA will, for the most part, be number 1, and Yelan will be number 2. When the reaction actually happens, the cloud's damage is based on 100% of INEFFA's personal damage, but only 50% of Yelan's personal damage. It does include damage from the 3rd and 4th highest damage characters as well, assuming they applied Hydro or Electro, but only 1/12 of their full damage, so essentially nothing and not really worth considering. The final result, and if the cloud crits or not, is only based on the highest damage character. Again, INEFFA in this case, so there's a 75% chance it crits, even if Yelan had 200 crit rate. Obviously, by building Yelan better with more EM and crit damage, she'd be the damage leader and her crit rate would be more important. Though, even as the secondary character, if she doesn't crit, it will still lower the damage, so I only point this out to clarify INEFFA's stats aren't any more special than anyone else's, even though she is required for Lunar Charge to exist at all. With that said, I am curious if my calculations were right, so I'll do a live demonstration here. The max number we're looking for should be about 21,434. This is if Yelan and INEFFA both crit, and the Cloud's Lunar Charge crits as well. Yeah, okay, so there are a couple other numbers floating about, but this is the actual reaction damage. It's a few points higher due to not including the ones in the formula as well as rounding, but cool. Absolutely close enough to say we understand the formula. This tells us a few key things. Importantly, even though the reaction damage does consider all characters and in a way combines their stats, you cannot, for example, just build a full EM first character and a full crit damage second character if you're going for high LC numbers. The bulk of the damage will still just come from the single character that does the most personal Lunar Charge damage, and that would be with a healthy mix of EM and crit. From there, we can get some useful information about build and stat priority and what actually makes the bigger difference. INEFFA is already built pretty well for Lunar Charge damage, but I assume due to diminishing returns of EM, sacrificing a little more for crit damage would make a difference, so let's try. In this build, we lost 65 EM but could gain 36 crit damage. Running the calculations, 267 EM gives us a 70.5% Lunar Charge buff, and then of course with more crit damage, that number gets multiplied higher. Indeed, we do slightly more damage, on par with the calculations, as it increased INEFFA's personal Lunar Charge damage from 15,672 to 16,077. Though it is generally harder to get 36 crit damage than 65 EM, so it's probably not worth it. What if we went the other way? Let's try this EM heavy build with 482 EM and 178.3 crit damage. Versus the last build, her personal Lunar Charge damage is ever so slightly higher. just like by 20 points, which still was a bit surprising. We only gained 215 EM while losing a massive 75 crit damage. Based on the stat distributions for main stats and substats, crit damage is worth about 3 times more than Elemental Mastery, and that's ignoring the fact you can only get 1 crit damage main stat. While we're here, we may as well go extreme in the other direction. 99 EM and 288.7 crit damage. As expected, when the huge crit damage has a smaller number to multiply, it's less effective. This build has an actually significant damage decrease over the high EM build. Full EM is not much better though, as you sacrifice too much of everything. I did try to at least keep her at 2k attack for the passive though. And with this build, her personal lunar charge damage is 14,231. I did a few other simulated calculations, we're not going to actually show gameplay here, starting with 400 EM and 200 crit damage, and gradually exchanging stats. Assuming it's accurate to say 1 crit damage is worth 3 EM, it seems as though purely for reaction damage, EM is better. But it's always worth keeping in mind INEFFA does damage outside of reactions as well. Her burst mainly, as the passive attack she does, also benefits from EM, but we'll talk about that later. But alright, to wrap up this section, a quick little summary. The damage Lunar Charge does is mostly reliant on the stats of one character. That character will be the one best built for LC damage. High EM, high crit damage, and enough crit rate, which is a typical build for most reaction-based DPSs anyway. If you want to get decent LC numbers, you should have a second Hydro or Electro character built like this as well. The third and fourth characters are mostly irrelevant and not worth building around. And now on to INEFFA, which, compared to that, should be pretty simple. INEFFA is a polearm wielding Electro character. Her normal attack is unimportant. With her E, she summons "We the Wobot" that attacks enemies while providing a shield to the team. The shield is decent with a base HP of 11,720 at talent level 8 and the bare minimum 2,000 attack. Like most elemental shields, it is way better at protecting your team from electro damage. Her burst is an attack, pretty big multiplier there at level 8. It also resets the robot's duration, though it already lasts 20 seconds with her E having a 16-second cooldown, so it's more of a utility thing for some rotations. Her first passive is where we get to do some more math. Yay! Robot does an extra attack when there's a lunar charge cloud around. This damage is considered lunar charge damage and follows the formula pretty closely. Though, because it's based on INEFFA's attack as well, this stat actually matters here. Here's the formula. Again, I'm not going to take you step by step through it, but the main interesting thing about this is the X3 attached to the end, straight up tripling the final damage. But also, it does take EM and of course the base lunar charge damage buff into consideration as well. The higher 28Ks we saw earlier while testing the reaction damage is that attack. Definitely more impressive than a 65% multiplier would lead you to believe. Her next passive is a decent EM buff after burst. At 2,000 attack, she provides 120 EM, with no cap. The final real passive is the buff to lunar charged base damage, but I think we talked about that enough for now. I'll just reiterate that this is what we need the minimum 2,000 attack for. Taking a look at Constellation, C1 looks pretty huge. It reads very similar to that LC buffing passive, but it doesn't say it increases base damage, so I assume it just gets tacked onto the EM buff in the formula. Regardless, much like her passive, you still only need 2,000 attack to max it. Well, okay, since we already did the math, sure, why not? Using our first INEFFA build, these are our numbers for her personal LC damage. She had 332 EM and 216 crit damage, and we ended up with a personal lunar charge damage of 15,672. The 50% from C1 most likely gets added to the EM's 85.4%, which, as usual, is increased before crit damage. So here's the updated numbers. As you can see, we jumped from about 15.5k to almost 20k. It is a nice buff, but not as insane as I initially thought. Regardless, since it's a buff to all LC damage, it also increases INEFFA's passive attack as well as your partner's personal damage, resulting in a more substantial buff than just, an extra 5k on her personal LC damage. C2 is an extra instance of damage after burst. Unfortunately, again, I can't test this, but assuming it works on the same principles as her 65% attack passive, which would be logical as it's also LC damage, 300% would be huge. She also resummons the shield from E, which is more impactful since unlike the robot, they can be destroyed. Constellations 3, 4, and 5 are pretty mediocre as it's either talent ups or some extra energy regen. All things that INEFFA cares less about than most. C6 is more damage, again assuming this is based on the same formula as her passive. 135% multiplier every 3.5 seconds is again quite huge. Personally, I'd never think it's worth having to go through 3, 4, and 5 though. If you want to invest in her, my opinion is that C1 or C2 are both good stopping points. Moving right on to artifact builds, currently her best in slot is Gilded Dreams. It gives a lot of EM and some attack. Most people, myself included, expect a new artifact set soon that buffs lunar charge damage, more specifically than Thundering Fury. For now, since I don't have a good gilded set, I'm just using two 2-piece sets that give attack and EM. In my case, it's Gladiator and Wanderer's Troop. Considering most people have a lot more of these to choose from, it's easily possible to outperform gilded with better substats. Main stats are generally attack crit unless you have really good pieces or high attack buffs in the team. No matter what, you should aim for a minimum of 2000 attack. Besides that, general DPS build focusing on crit, attack, and EM subs. As for energy recharge, it really depends on team, so add some if you're having energy issues. Ideally, at least if the main DPS really cares about the EM buff from INEFFA's burst, you can burst every rotation. Otherwise, it's not that important. For weapon build, obviously, if you have her signature, it's going to be the best, as it almost always is. I'm going with Missive Wind Spear today, as it's her best F2P weapon, and that's just how I do first showcases. Some newer players may not have it though, as it was an event weapon. Most 5-stars are fine for her as well, notably Sauce with its EM to attack conversion. As we know, EM is an important stat for INEFFA. With this weapon though, I do imagine you go even a bit harder on EM while you're building her. And outside of those, anything with a decent amount of attack, EM, or crit stats will be fine. Currently, since most of her damage comes from Lunar Charged, there aren't too many specialized passives that would fit her besides just raw stats, so look for those. What might be a little confusing is that Lunar Charged is considered electro damage when you're hitting enemies, so if they have a ton of electro res, it's going to do less damage, but because it's a reaction, it doesn't get buffed from stuff like electro damage goblet or elemental damage bonuses. The teams and showcase portion of this video will be pretty short, as I mainly wanted to focus on the mechanics of Lunar Charged. I'll save most of that for a future video. For today, we're mainly focused on INEFFA in a typical Lunar Charge team with primarily Hydros and Electros. We'll try a full 4-star team versus the Abyss. We're using Xingqiu as our required Hydro. His high application and decent damage don't hurt either. Auroron's mainly here because I wanted to bring INEFFA as well, that specifically buffs Lunar Charge damage with his first passive, but doesn't have enough Night Soul points on his own to max the buff. Here's a final look at INEFFA's current build and stats, as we were swapping it around a lot. Again, we are rocking a Missive Wind Spear, nice chunk of attack on it, then more attack and EM on passive during battle, 2-piece Glad and Troop. But yeah, I'm actually quite happy with her overall stats considering she has a 4-star weapon. We're easily over 2k attack even before the weapon passive, over 400 EM with the weapon passive, and okay crit stats, nothing special. We have 123 ER, so we'll see if that's enough. So yeah, just gonna run through Abyss real quick. Floor 11 is usually not too hard, so not sure I'll have much to say. First chamber went by pretty fast, could definitely see some decently impressive Lunar Charges going off. In this Abyss, there is no bonus for it, by the way. I must have messed something up on the second chamber because I didn't see Lunar Charged at all on the big lava churl, though could also just be shield mechanics, which I haven't really thought about until now. And final chamber was also quite easy, went by super fast, even for floor 11. Now the real challenge though, floor 12. No advantages for Lunar Charged or even Electro or Hydro damage here, so might be a little tough. Well, here on the first chamber, we have no chance. I didn't recognize this is the ice boss you practically need Pyro for, so let's try the other side. Oh yeah, for this guy you basically need Cryo, so guess we'll cheat a bit and throw Mawika in for Pyro and Night Soul points for INEFFA. I'll just do her E though. Okay, just a little bit of motorcycle, you know, just for some pyro. Whoops. I bursted. That was a misclick. Ah well, I still think unironically she actually didn't do that much of the total damage. And I mean, yeah, we definitely did need some pyro here. I also did want the Night Soul points for INEFFA, and so they had to be from Natlin, and it's like, Pyro MC haven't raised him yet, so it's like, you know, as we're going through here, if there are any big LC numbers, I'll point them out with editing. So far the damage has seemed pretty consistent, but you know, we do get some popping off here and there. For chamber 2 and chamber 3, I actually didn't even write anything in my script, so I guess they weren't all that impressive. There are some general notes I want to drop down while you're watching the gameplay here. Firstly, at least in this team, the 123 energy recharge was definitely not enough for INEFFA. She always needed quite a bit more energy than she had, you know, when the next rotation started, so that's something we should probably consider. Secondly, I haven't used INEFFA since the raising mode, so I kind of forgot you're supposed to burst before you know, press E and start spamming his attacks. So I pretty much always messed up that part of the rotation, but besides that, I think it went fine. And of course, Mawika did help a lot, but really after the first chamber, I didn't do anything just pressing E. If I just totally skipped her, it'd be a completely dead spot. If it wasn't for the first boss, I'm quite confident we could have gotten through it without her. But alright, there is INEFFA and Lunar Charged. My current thoughts on the reaction itself, well, it definitely does more damage than Electro Charged, but since the cloud attack's much slower, it pretty much just evens out. I think Lunar Charged as direct damage is much more interesting though, assuming future characters would use the same formula INEFFA does. Guess we'll have to wait and see for that. INEFFA herself is somewhat simple, an off-field Electro DPS that provides a shield and a Lunar Charged buff, which currently not much can use that effectively. But yeah, that'll do it for me. If you have any thoughts, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Dropping a like or subscribing if you enjoyed is greatly appreciated as well. Thanks, as always, for watching, and until next time.